Right. Okay, so welcome to our third webinar from Agri-Comfort. Today we're going to focus on calf barn ventilation. My guest today is Dr. Leiterman. We are here in your office at Crystal Creek in Spoon Hill, Wisconsin.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us here in the webinar. So yeah, like I said, this is Dr. Ryan. I'm Nele from Agri-Comfort. I'm going to be your general host as usual. All right, let's just talk a little bit about what's your background in calf barn ventilation.
Sure. Yeah. So I graduated college. I graduated high school and I went to college to be an engineer. I graduated as an engineer and found out that I actually didn't want to do engineering and as a career, and I applied to veterinary school and got in and graduated as a veterinarian in 2009. And I practiced for years in southern Wisconsin in a predominantly dairy practice, and so it was myself and 5 other practitioners, and all we did was dairy. In the course of doing that, I worked a lot with calves, and really saw that there was an opportunity for ventilation in all these calf barns that I worked with, and so then that was really fun for me because I liked working with the livestock, I liked working with the calves, and I got to kind of draw on the engineering background and do these ventilation systems. And so I've been doing ventilation since 2009, and it's really my primary #1 passion.
Okay. So a question that I get asked very frequently, I mentioned before that I go to a lot of trade shows or do a lot of farm calls, and a lot of people ask me, why do we really need calf barn ventilation? And like, is this really something I should like spend money on? They understand that a calf needs like good milk and good bedding to be healthy and thriving, and like vaccination are like key part of what we consider good calf healthcare. And the air quality is kind of something I feel something a little forgotten about. But research actually shows that bad air is like, or air quality is like the #1 risk factor for this respiratory diseases in calves.
Absolutely.
And I feel like people they always forget that there are 2 ways of getting a pneumonia or respiratory disease. So there's contagious pneumonia, which is like caused by viruses and bacteria, which are primary pathogens. So
Absolutely.
like a small amount of this pathogen hitting the unprotected calf is enough for the calf to get sick. We can prevent this by good hygiene standards, good vaccination protocols, and things like this, and treatment as antibiotics when the calf does get sick to get rid of this kind of pneumonia. But the other side of pneumonia, or the other cause of pneumonia, or the possible cause of pneumonia, that's something called environmental pneumonia, and that is caused by bad air quality. Air quality parameters are how high is the humidity, how high is the bacteria count, how high is the ammonia. Ammonia is a noxious gas that can hurt the lung. That alone can cause pneumonia by getting away the protective layers in, like hurting the protective layers in the lung, and then leading way for bacteria that would not initially have caused pneumonia in a calf that is not exposed to that much bad air. So that's kind of the background behind it.
And I can kind of maybe tell a story or 2 in practice. Yeah. And so a lot of times I'll get a phone call from a farmer and they'll say, we're really struggling with pneumonia and we want to look at a ventilation system. And I always tell people it's important to understand we can't fix a problem until we know what the root cause is. And so, for those of you involved on the dairy cow side of things, anyone who has any milking or milk quality background is going to know if a farmer calls you and says, I have an elevated somatic cell count, fix it. Well, the first thing we need to know is, do you have a cell count issue that's related to a contagious issue, like your mycoplasmas or like your strep ags, that kind of stuff? Or do you have it from an environmental issue? And we can't figure out how to solve that problem until we know what the cause is. It's the exact same thing for calf barn pneumonia. There's the contagious pneumonias like your mycoplasmas, your salmonellas, that you cannot ventilate your way out of. Those have nothing to do with air quality, and those have everything to do with sanitation parameters, nose-to-nose contact. And just generally speaking, my experience has been for the last 10 years that we tend to see more contagious pneumonias in our group house calves because they have that nose-to-nose contact and they're in contact with each other. We don't see much contagious pneumonia in our calves raised in individual penning because they don't have as much contact, and so they can't spread that disease as easily. The flip side is, in our individual pens, we tend to see much more environmental pneumonia because if they're not ventilated appropriately, we create these little cubes of air inside the pen where the air quality is poor.
Yeah.
And, I think inherently people think, well, they're getting pneumonia from that bad air quality. And what they're actually doing is that air, whether it's high in dust, particulate, bacteria, noxious gases, when they breathe that in and out, in and out, in and out, it's actually irritating on the inside of the respiratory tract. And you can almost think about it like little sandpaper rubbing the inside of the respiratory tract, and it irritates it. And what that does is it allows pathogens that are normally in the calf's nasopharynx, like your Pasteurella, your Mannheimia, and your Histophilus.
That would not be able to cause a pneumonia in a perfectly healthy.
Yeah, they're there. And that's I think that's a critical point that people should understand is Pasteurella, Mannheimia, and Histophilus normally live in every calf, in the back of their throat. And every day they're trying to march down into the lungs to set up infection, and the immune system's pushing them back up, and they have that balance and they stay healthy. Right. But if that respiratory tract is irritated, it's now much easier for those pathogens to set up shop and cause infection. So the environmental side of things, which is what we're going to talk about today with the ventilation, it's the things that make up quote unquote bad air, your ammonias, your dust, your bacteria levels. They're just an irritant that damage the respiratory tract, making it easier for them to get infection. So if we can remove those irritants with better ventilation, that's why we're able to prevent the pneumonia.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. And like again, why is this important? And like it's just my calves. Some people are like, well, calves, that's pretty normal. As like a kid in kindergarten, they get pneumonia, they get over it, we treat it, they're fine. They grow out to be like. People are sometimes not really looking at their calves as a production unit because they're not bringing in any income right now. And but what they're forgetting or leaving a little bit out of the equation in this point is that these are going to be a future dairy cows. So we're mostly talking about dairy heifer calves here right now, right? It was actually a study, or this is like a conclusion from several studies, this graph, and the researchers looked into the consequences of pneumonia in any stage of age, from birth till like lactation, so from 1 to, let's say, 2 years old, and then the effect on the dairy cow. And you can see, so the gray are cows that did not ever have pneumonia in their life, and the blue are cows that had multiple episodes of pneumonia, which is fairly normal. Like a lot of calves do not have just like one-time pneumonia. They maybe have like a little coughing while they're drinking milk, and then they maybe have like an episode when they're weaned off, and then another one when they're heifers. That would be a pretty normal history of a heifer. Right. Yeah, I think so too. That's what I see in barns too. And you can see first lactation, it is relatively close. They did not give the information if this was like a significant difference or not, but you can see in second lactation where we really starting to see the difference. The milk yield especially is lower in cows that had multiple episodes of pneumonia. And it's just pure logic, because the lung tissue is a non-regenerative tissue, meaning if it's hurt, the body's going to repair it, meaning it's going to build scar tissue, which has just no function. It just is a replacer in the lung, but it doesn't have the oxygen exchanging quality of normal healthy lung tissue. And the lungs are kind of the weak spot in the cow metabolism as it is.
Right, absolutely.
For example, a horse has 2.5 times as much volume or lung surface as a cow, but a cow has up to 100% higher metabolism as a horse.
Right.
And it's like the oxygen is the fuel to any kind of metabolic process in any kind of mammal's body. So it's the same in cows as in humans or horses. But if they can't get the oxygen into the blood and into the organs, it's just the fuel is missing, so they cannot perform. And if we take away parts of the lung by hurting it and it's dying, and then the body's replacing it with scar tissue, we just limit this resource.
Right. And I actually read a research paper as it relates to horses and cow lungs, is that because cows have such limited lung volume in relation to a pound of body compared to what you'd have if you're a horse, Their airway velocities are actually much higher when they breathe. The velocities of air traveling into their lungs are higher than a horse. And we think that that's actually problematic because it drives the bacteria deeper. The faster it's going, it pushes things in farther. And I think that's why cattle are more susceptible to pneumonia than horses. And it's probably why we race horses and we don't race cows. Is because they don't have the lung capacity. Okay, so a cow race would be significantly more boring than a horse race, which has all this cardiovascular and lung output, right?
Absolutely,
so I think that's why we don't race cows, is their lungs
one
just
of many reasons feels like
racing.
But good point, And what you just described was the bacteria being like inhaled by the just by the breath itself, because the lung is smaller and with one breath, a cow is very easily reaches a far end of its lung, which is generally very poorly ventilated. So anything that goes in there doesn't go out very well, if very easily described. And that has a major impact, and especially if we're breathing in a lot of bacteria. So this was a study where researchers compared air quality based on how much airborne bacteria they found. So they didn't specify what kind of bacteria it was just any kind of live bacteria. And they compared normal outside air, so they were standing in a field, checking that air, and that had 100 to 1,000 colony-forming units of bacteria. That is a pretty good starting line for what normal, good quality air is.
Right, absolutely.
And then they compared clean office air. So let's say a room like the one we're in right now. And the number is already twice as high, up to twice as high. And then they went into a barn and just stood in the alleyway and looked into that. And it was already 5 times to 15 times, depending on what you're looking at, higher. The more you get into those highly polluted areas, the numbers will also vary more extremely. But they made a very smart move, in my opinion, because this doesn't even look too bad to me. If I was if
that's the air you're breathing.
And office air, that's pretty clean usually. It's ventilated and it's okay. I spend all day in there at night. Don't go home with pneumonia every day. And then the barn, only 10 times as bad. I mean, that's probably okay. But what they did is they were in the alleyway, which usually has a nice breezeway through it, or the breeze going through it very open. It's not where the animals are, and it's definitely not where the manure is. And then they went into a calf pen, and that's when the numbers skyrocketed. So that's where you see those 3 million CFUs. That is just bad. One breath, and the calf gets just an overload of bacteria. The healthiest lung and immune system probably can ward it off, because you always have to look at it as a scale base. If the immune system is this good and there's this many bacteria trying to hit it, the immune system wins. If it's just a lot more bacteria, it doesn't mean the immune system is initially weak. It's just not strong enough to deal with this kind of load. So we have to get rid of this. And to get rid of it, as we would be we have a lot of manure in our barn, we have to clean it out. We have a lot of bacteria in our air, we have to clean it out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, right, you mentioned this a little bit in the introduction already, that you looked into this whole concept since 2009 now of calf pen ventilations, and you were a practicing dairy vet, correct?
Yep, that's right.
And a lot of farmers here in Wisconsin already had calf pen ventilation.
That's right.
And they were just not happy with it. Could you maybe give us a little rundown of what you found there and what you found when you looked into the history of this?
Yep. So this is probably one of the most near and dear topics to my heart, is the way our industry currently does ventilation is different than what I'm going to propose.
Yeah.
And the part of it is, why do we do it the way we do? And the current industry recommendation is for cold weather ventilation to do a minimum of 4 air exchanges per hour. But the important part is, the word minimum is oftentimes forgotten, and people just say, oh yeah, I heard this guy give a lecture, I went to this class, and they said for winter ventilation we should do 4 air exchanges per hour. And if you ask someone why do we do that, they'll say a multitude of reasons. 1, that's what someone else told me to do. 2, I don't know, I read in a paper one time and they said that that's what we do. Or 3, my personal favorite, well, you don't want too much air. You don't want too much air in the winter. And we're going to come back to what is, too much air. But why do we do 4 air exchanges per hour? And there is science and then there is the human element, okay? And I'll just tell you, we say cows are creatures of habit, people are creatures of habit as much or more than cows. And so I did a little research into this. Where did this notion of 4 air exchanges per hour come from? I spent a tremendous amount of time researching this. And so in 1974, there was a professor at the University of Minnesota. His name was Dr. Donald Bates. And he was an engineer, but he was fascinated with livestock buildings and air quality. And so in 1974, he was at an international livestock symposium giving a presentation. And the title of the presentation was, I'm going to paraphrase, What We Know and What We Don't Know. And one of the things he talked about was, we don't know how much air, fresh air, we should be ventilating our closed-up barns with to keep calves healthy. And in 1974, he said, we don't know, but I think, he said it was an empirical, he arrived at it empirically. Okay, another word for empirical means it was a guess. Okay, an educated guess, but a guess nonetheless. And he said, I think we should try 4 air exchanges per hour to keep the barn fresh in the winter, okay? Then in 1976, he publishes a paper saying, again, I don't really know, I have no research to support this, but to me it feels like, with my experience, if we did 4 air exchanges an hour, that's going to help keep the barn fresh. So then finally in the winter of 1977 into 78, he did a trial at the University of Minnesota, and there was 2 groups of 20 calves in treatment group A and 2 groups of 20 calves in treatment group B. And treatment group A got 1 air exchange per hour, and treatment group B got 4 air exchanges per hour. At the conclusion of this, they necropsied a bunch of calves, they evaluated lung tissue, and lo and behold, I think as it would stand to reason, the calves that got 4 air exchanges per hour in the winter were healthier and had less pneumonia than the calves that got 1 air exchange per hour. Okay, so then now armed with this new data, in 1979, he published another paper citing this research, saying that 4 air exchanges per hour are better than 1 air exchange per hour in the winter. Okay, so, and then that's it. That's the history of this. Now, that one research trial, which compared 1 air exchange to 4 air exchanges with a total of 80 calves, that is the entire basis for how we ventilate calf barns today. But what happened is that was so long ago, people kind of forgot about it. So then come along in 2008, Dr. Ken Nordland, he was my professor in vet school. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him and the work that he did. He came along and did another research trial, kind of similar to what Bates did in 77, 78. And he compared naturally ventilated calf barns that didn't have any mechanical ventilation in the winter to a naturally ventilated calf barn that had a mechanical system added, the tube ventilation system added to provide 4 air exchanges per hour. So, you know, Bates looked at 1 air exchange versus 4. Dr. Nordland looked at, you know, you can't really say that the natural ventilated barns with no fans had a 0 ventilation rate because there was some natural ventilation going on, but how do you quantify that? So we're going to say, you know, very close to 0 versus 4. There, that I've just given you guys the entire history of research on calf barn ventilation in the world. Yeah. Okay, so 2 trials were done. One looked at 1 air exchange versus 4. The other one looked at essentially 0 versus 4. Both found out that 4 was better. I'm telling this story to a farmer, and he says, "You're telling me that the way that the entire world is ventilating calf barns right now is based on 2 research trials, and both of them said that 4 was better than 0 or 4 was better than 1. Like, yeah. He says it. So we're talking about a graph with 2 data points. You know, in Bates' situation, it's, you know, pneumonia rates at 1 and versus pneumonia rates at 4. You know, so this is Bates. This is what Bates did. Okay, 1 versus 4, and he found that the pneumonia went down.
Yeah, it's not the
blue better.
Yeah.
See blue. You can't see any of it.
Yeah.
The point is, our industry is designing calf barn ventilation systems off graphs with 2 data points. And I think we need more. So that got me to think, what if we did more than 4 air exchanges, right? And every time a farmer told me, well, you don't want too much fresh air. If I asked them, what do you mean by too much? And every single time they say, well, we don't want calves to get exposed to a draft. Okay. And one of my major points that I'd like to cover at today's webinar is speed, and air volume are 2 very different things. It's possible to have a very high volume, very low speed ventilation system. And if that's the case, if we look at calves in outdoor hutches, and they have the lowest pneumonia rates of any type of calf housing out there. Calves are the healthiest in hutches, not my opinion. There's a lot of research to prove this. Absolutely. The problem is people just don't like feeding in them outside, but calves are the healthiest in hutches. And is it any coincidence that calves, when they come out of their hutch to drink their milk, they are surrounded by an infinite volume of fresh air. They are standing in wide open outside. Does anyone worry about those calves having too much fresh air around them?
Exactly.
The answer is no. But the second that we put calves in a barn, we say, oh, don't want too much fresh air. We better limit it to 4 air exchanges. And that's what really got me wondering, is that I wonder if we're not under ventilating our calf barns with 4 air exchanges per hour. Can we do more? And so I found some farmers that said, you know, Ryan, what you're saying makes sense. And I didn't want to like jump from 4 to 10 right off the bat. So I got a little bold and I said, well, I'm going to design this barn for 6 air exchanges. And I designed some barns for 6 air exchanges, and turns out they actually had less respiratory disease than barns that I had done before with 4. And then I got a little more bold and I did a few more barns at 8 air exchanges per hour. And this is in the winter in the Midwest. The point is, it's not drafty. We're talking volume. I changed the volume from 4 air exchanges to 6 to 8 to 10. I've got barns now that we're doing 14 air exchanges per hour in the dead of winter, and having less and less respiratory disease the more fresh air we bring in. And I think conceptually, if we can if we make sure that the system is not drafty, and we can increase the amount of fresh air, what we're doing is we're getting closer and closer and closer to approximating what a calf in an outdoor hutch experiences, which is high volumes of fresh air. And if there's not drafty on them, then they're healthy. And so that's what we're really, that's really the whole goal behind the flap duct, is that the first thing we as an industry need to understand is we have to separate speed and volume. You can have a high volume, low speed system. Conversely, you can have a low volume, high speed system. You can have every permutation of that. But the key takeaway is speed and volume are very, very different.
Yeah. And I mean, this is kind of how we calculate barns. So maybe let's get back to the how much air are we going to do before we get into the speed part, because that is the first question. Or the second question after, do I need a ventilation system, that I get is like, how much air are we talking here? Like, how big does this need to be? And you explained very thoroughly that 40 years in this industry, everybody looked at the size of the barn.
And the volume.
And the volume of the barn, and at 4 exchanging the air and that volume 4 times an hour. Do you think that is the right approach?
No, I think that that's an oversimplistic approach. I mean, I think inherently having a conversation about air exchanges per hour is easy to visualize. You're like, okay, I'm going to turn the barn air over every 15 minutes or 4 times an hour. But the reality of it is, I mean, it has to be more complicated than that, because if you have a barn and the whole barn, say there's these 2 amazingly privileged cats, and this whole barn was made for just 2 cats to live in, then 4 air exchanges per hour is probably a lot of fresh air for those 2 cats. But if we have the exact same barn that's filled with 150, 400-pound feeder steers, then is 4 air exchanges enough? And so I've looked at it and say, I really don't think we can just do an exchanges per hour of barn volume, just blanket. I think it has to include more parameters in that. And one of them that we look at is, we do look at barn volume. Another one we look at is pen volume. And the third one we look at is group size, or amount of animal body weight. So whenever I do a ventilation system, I add up essentially how many hundredweights are in the barn. And I'll make sure that I size my system appropriately, more based on how many pounds of animal are in the barn than worrying about how many barn exchange rates are we getting. And
pen volume, so it is a difference if they are like in individual little cubicles, or if are boxes or pens or whatever, or if they're in a group on flats, for example, or if there's if they can like basically roam around free in the whole barn, or if there's like one specific point where we need to get the air to, right?
Right. So for example, there's really 3 things that are important in ventilating a calf barn. You need to get the right volume of air into the barn, which I generally think is higher than what the current industry is doing. You need to have it on the right speed on the animals based on outdoor temperatures. So we want it fast and drafty when it's hot out for heat abatement, fly control, but then it has to be very slow and safe when it's cold out. So you need the right volume, the right speed, And lo and behold, point number 3, you actually have to get it to the animal. And so that's why we look at pen volume, is that, you know, a person can design a ventilation system and talk about all the interior barn volume. And a lot of these barns nowadays are higher sidewalls, 12, 14 feet with big peaks and stuff. You know, unless we are like triple stacking our calves, or these calves live on stilts, they're only going to be breathing the air that's, you know, 4 feet and down. Okay, so when I look at a barn, I don't really care about the quality of air up in the rafters, because calves are never going to breathe that. I say, what's their pen, and you know, what is the air immediately surrounding those? That's what Dr. Northern called the microenvironment, and that's what we need to focus on. So when I'm calculating a ventilation system, I'm sizing my fans and my CFM based on pounds of animal in the barn, size of their pen, what the volume of the pen is, what the volume of the air that they're breathing is. And then I also look at barn volume, but generally I don't put too much weight into that.
Yeah, and again, where the calves are at. So it's a difference. Do we have 4 rows? Then we basically need 4 tubes probably to get them directly over the pen to get the air in there, and not just like one on the top of the peak of the barn.
Yeah, I mean, it's common to put one on the top of the peak of the barn, and I've abandoned doing that. I haven't done that since 2015, because when I fog those systems, they don't make it into the pens, as well as putting a tube right over top of the calf and just forcing it down into the pen. That's much more reliable. And again, we can have a system that's got the right amount of airflow and is not drafty, but if it doesn't make it into the calf pen, you know, we didn't ventilate the space.
Sure. And so we kind of already talked about this a little bit, but maybe just give us like a little rundown what a draft is. I'm gonna get confronted with this a lot. I do not have an engineering background, so I had to learn this too.
Sure.
When I first started working with ventilation systems. So yeah, could you explain us and what is a draft, what makes draft, and what was your idea how to manage that?
Yeah, so drafts are the single most commonly misunderstood things in ventilation of anything that I deal with. There's a couple ways to define a draft, and I think I'll pose it that what I think we would probably all agree is, in general, when a farmer says the word draft, they have a negative connotation to it. Okay, so really a draft is just a speed. So if you look it up by definition, a draft is airflow on a baby calf that is greater than 50 feet per minute of speed. Okay, they call that a draft. But now the problem is it's more complicated than that. If that is by definition a draft, is it necessarily a bad thing? And what I mean by that is, what if it's 90 degrees out? What if it's 90 degrees Fahrenheit out, and that calf is standing in 100 feet per minute airspeed? Technically, that calf is subject to a draft. But in the farmer's mind, a draft is something bad. And so what we have to tease apart is, a draft, if it's going to be in a negative connotation, a draft is really a function of airspeed, air temperature, and body size. So for example, if it's 45 degrees Fahrenheit and we have 100 feet per minute air on a baby calf,
so this little
these little guys, that temperature is below below their thermal neutral zone, and that would have a negative effect on the health of the animal. If in that exact same situation with the same airspeed, same temperature, we are blowing this across 1,000 pound heifers, it's not a problem at all. So when we're talking about what's a draft and what's actually damaging to the health of the animal, it's not just airspeed, it's airspeed, air temperature, and body size. And that's important to understand. And I've been on farms before where it's literally 90 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer, and we are just sweating standing in the barn. And the farmer says, well, I don't want a draft on these calves. Okay, fine. Well, then we won't call it a draft. We'll call it heat abatement. But the point is, you know, air speed has to be taken in relation to body size and temperature before we just start calling it a draft. And this isn't a thing that just plagues our farmers. It also plagues veterinarians as well. I heard this amazing story of a veterinarian that would light a lighter, and he would look at the flame, and if the flame even flickered just a little bit, he said that there was a dangerous draft in the barn and the ventilation had to be turned off.
I've seen that quite a bit happening,
And we all know that that's just not the case. I mean, again, I keep going back to calves and hunches. They're so healthy, and they have a tremendous volume of fresh air to breathe. And sometimes the wind swirls around and blows in their pen, and these calves thrive. So I guess my point is, I think more calves have died from being underventilated than they ever have from being overventilated. Again, I don't ever want calves to be exposed to a draft when it's cold out.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we have to shut down the volume. It just means we have to control the speed.
Absolutely, and I also think it's unnecessary to keep a calf barn at a certain temperature.
I agree.
Because that is because almost no barn has a heating system. So we could potentially put the air in, heat it up, and like let it out of the barn again. That uses up a tremendous amount of energy, and that would just be not economically feasible, and nobody would do it. So when farmers are saying, well, my barn has to stay warm for the cows, they're saying, I'm going to close it up. So I keep the outside temperature, the outside air out, so the body heat of the calves, which is not a lot that they're shedding, is going to warm up this barn, and it's going to stay in there because outside air is cold. If it comes in, it's cold. I don't really think that's a problem.
I agree.
Yes, especially right now, it's very cold here in the Midwest in the winter. If we let outside air in and like change it 10 times, the barn is going to be the exact same temperature as outside is.
That's right.
And that is out of the thermometer range of a newborn baby calf. But that is not a problem because the ambient temperature that they're feeling is what they're actually perceiving where they are. So if they are in a very high bedding of nice long stem straw where they can like snuggle into, maybe even have a little jacket on, that is the microclimate under the jacket that they're feeling, and they're fine.
That's right.
They're more than fine. You just have to make that effort and give them that instead of closing up the larger environment, the whole barn, and make that nice and warm and cozy, because that just reduces the air quality tremendously.
Yeah, and we actually see that, you know, I've been fortunate to travel a little bit around the world and look at different barn systems and how different countries' mentalities ventilate stuff. And I would say in Canada, for sure, the insulated heated calf barn is much more common than it ever is in the Midwest. And my comment is always, you're going to pay to keep those calves warm one way or the other. You're going to burn LP. And anytime we have a ventilation system and a heating system, the two go like this, because the more ventilation of fresh air I put in, the more LP we have to burn and the increased cost. So you can either heat your barn with LP, or you can feed your calves more calories, bed them really good with straw, and put a calf jacket on. You're going to have costs either way. But by going the more calories, the bedding, and the calf jacket, that allows us to keep a nice high plane of fresh air. Whereas if we go heated barn, the only way that we can get that high plane of fresh air is by burning a lot of LP, and generally speaking, people are going to turn down their ventilation rates to keep the barn temperature up. So,
absolutely. Yeah, I agree 100%. So what did you already mentioned a little bit, you invented the flap duct to control the airspeed. So how does that work, and how are we preventing drafts?
Yeah, so from 2009 until the end of 2014, I ventilated calf barns just like everybody else, doing the 4 air exchanges per hour in the winter. And it wasn't until that conversation with that farmer that I kind of had this epiphany that speed and volume are different, and that we could bring in more volume in a manner that's not drafty. And so then I started looking at ways that we could have a system that can really keep a high volume, but easily change the speed. Because if I can have a high volume and make it fast in the summer, and then with the same system have a high volume and make it slow in the winter, now I can do year-round ventilation with one system. And so that's what came up with the flap duct. And the point of the flap duct to understand is it's all about controlling the diameter of the hole in the positive pressure tube. So the larger the diameter of the hole, when the air comes out of there, it comes out with more volume, it has more mass, and that mass and that velocity creates momentum. It can carry that speed much farther.
I usually, I usually use the analogy of a water hose. So I'm always like, that's people that maybe a little bit more familiar with water flow than airflow, but generally works the same. We're talking flow rates here. So if I have a hose with one big hole, or let's say a watering can that just has the one opening, and I water my plants with it. If that big stream of water hits the air and it's, the earth, and it's the soil, and it's very loose, it's going to create a hole because this water from this one big hole has a lot of momentum. How do I solve this problem? We all know the answer to that. We put this little sieve on it to make a lot of small holes. Generally, the same amount of water comes out there, maybe a little less, because the small holes in the sieve don't add up to the one big hole. But that helps me reduce the momentum of the water, and if I then water my plants, I do not wash away the loose soil.
Right.
Same system here. We do the exact same thing.
Absolutely. And to your point, if you take the cross-sectional area of all the big holes that we use for summer and you add them up to, say, number of square inches, and then you add up all the little holes on that we use for winter ventilation, they actually are the same amount of cross-sectional area.
Maybe you just show the prop that you brought.
Sure. So this is a sample of the actual tube, and how it works is we have one side with multiple small holes, and this is our winter ventilation. Then we have another side that just has one big hole with a couple smaller holes, and this is our summer ventilation. And what makes our tube unique, and this is part of the patented design, is that we have a bottom sheet, we have a top sheet, but we also have this internal membrane in the middle. And what that allows us to do, this membrane is black on one side and white on the other. And what that allows us to do is select our hole pattern. So if we want to discharge our air out the big holes for summer, fast summer ventilation, we put the membrane to the top of the tube. When the air flows down the tube and inflates the duct, it forces the membrane to the top of the bag and essentially blocks off all these little holes on the top. So all the air is channeled out this big hole in the bottom, and we blow very fast, high volume air on the calves when it's hot, and that's summer heat abatement. If it gets cold, we can drop this membrane down, we block the holes on the bottom, and now we open the holes on the top. And all these little holes, the air comes out in these wispy little jets of air, and it's a much slower speed. And one thing for any math nerds in the audience, they're going to say, well, Ryan, what about this? The speed of the air leaving the duct, immediately leaving the duct, is the same speed for the little holes as the big holes, because we're pushing in the same volume of air, and we're letting it out essentially the same amount of total exit area in square inches. So it leaves the bag at the exact same speed. The difference is the speed at which it reaches the calf is very different. These little holes are so weak and wispy little jets of air that they quickly lose momentum and turn into just a cloud that sinks down to the calf. And we've got some videos to show how that works. But this is basically the crux of the technology. Yeah.
And also, I mean, these little holes are pointing upwards towards the ceiling.
Correct.
For example, if you have a very flat ceiling right on top of it, then the air just like kind of bounces off the ceiling and comes down. It's just a very indirect way of ventilating the calves versus the summer where you have the big stream directly down on them.
Exactly right. The main thing is as long as we're getting that fresh air to the calf in the calf space, then we say we're doing our job. So even in the winter, if we're shooting the air up away from the calves and it hits a solid ceiling and bounces down, as long as it gets to that calf space, we're doing our job.
Yeah. And we have some videos, we brought you some videos to show what we're talking about here. So,
so this is a barn, I think this is a 200 cow dairy, and they took an old stanchion barn in Wisconsin, which is not uncommon, and they converted it to group penning for calves. And so on this setting, we're using a 16-inch fan that's doing about 2,300 CFM through a 20-inch bag. And on the summer setting, we have big holes at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 7 o'clock to kind of spread, that along through the bedded pack. And if you want to play the video there, what we're getting for air speeds on the back of the calf is about 2.5 miles an hour, like extremely fast. So we're in that like 300 feet per minute range. Actually, maybe even a little higher than that. And what you can't see in the video here is when I started to take this video, just by me walking into the pen, I disrupted the calves. But prior to me getting in there, all these calves were laying directly under the tube in the high speed air. This is summer when we're doing this. And you'll see we blow that air straight down into the calf space, and we're effectively ventilating the air that the calves breathe, and we're providing a cooling effect by blowing the air on those calves.
And another nice effect in summer is that flies really don't like high-speed air.
Correct.
Or drafts in any kind of temperature, and they just try to avoid it. They cannot really fly and maneuver that good in it, so they try to stay in like low airspeed areas.
Correct.
So the calves actually even have like a little safe haven from flies if they lay directly under the airstream.
Absolutely. And we've got some videos of that too. I don't know if we included them here, but especially on calves in individual penning, say like the flex pens. If you've got a 100-foot row of calves in that flex pen and we concentrate our summer air in that space, we create a really drafty environment, and we help keep the fly pressure down on those calves as well.
Absolutely. especially in the hot shows, I usually like to point out to people that I have a car without air condition, but it has a vent, like it's like a heating in winter, that's there, and then it's only fast air that I can directly be. And everybody that remembers cars without air condition totally gets my point, because you turn that fan up as high as possible and point it directly at you in those high temperature days.
And it still cools you.
Because it feels good.
That's right. That's right. So now we'll go to the next video. This is the exact same barn, the same day. And in this one, we didn't change the fan speed. So there's still 2,300 CFM coming out of this tube, but we adjusted the membrane to the bottom of the bag. We've blocked the large summer holes, and now we're letting the air out the top of the bag. And you'll just see as it comes out, the video is starting to play now, that air just kind of comes out like a gentle cloud, because we're blowing it out these little holes, and it lacks the velocity that it lacks the momentum that the bigger holes had. And now you'll see we still get fresh air right down to the calf level, but we do it in a manner that's not drafty. And so the power of this is we now can have a ventilation system where we can have high speed drafty air when it's hot and high speed slow air when it's cold. And we don't have to we don't have to bring our ventilation rates down to 4 air exchanges per hour in the winter anymore. We can have 8 or 10 or 12 or 14 and it's not drafty.
So we only change the speed at calf level, nothing else.
Yeah,
Great. Okay, that brings us to the end of this webinar. I want to encourage anybody who's listening, thanks for staying with us for the time. And
thanks for taking time to be with us today.
To the webinar. If anybody has any more questions right now, just put them in the question section, and we're happy to answer them live. If any questions like pop in your head later on, please just email me and contact me. I'm also in constant contact with Dr. Ryan here. It's no problem to get the information right from the source, and we're happy to help. And then, as mentioned earlier, our next webinar is coming up. So in exactly 2 months, on March 27, that's a Friday, same time slot, we're going to do a webinar on cow comfort. That's Steve Bartlam, the North American Sales Manager for Agri-Comfort, and me, your host. We're going to talk about brushes and how they're going to increase the comfort of your dairy cows and what kind of impact that has on your dairy, like what benefits you're expecting when installing brushes. Okay, so see. Okay.
Oh, that's a common question.
Okay, so we have a question here from Leo Pauls from Canada. He's asking, when we are cooling down the barn to the outside temperature, as we explained, when we do 8 to 10 air exchanges an hour, yes, the barn temperature will drop to the outside temperature. We're talking Manitoba cold here, so it's minus 30 Celsius. It's almost minus 30 in Fahrenheit too. What are we going to do then with the water lines? They're going to freeze.
So, and this is common. And so there's a lot of reasons why people say, well, Ryan, I understand what you're saying about maintaining a good level of ventilation in the winter, but if I don't turn my fans down and I don't bring in less volume, I have water lines that freeze. We deal with that in the US, we deal with it in Canada. I think the main thing is understanding that there's ways to get around that. So we've had farmers in Wisconsin that have taken and built like a little box and put it up around their trough, and then they've insulated that with foam. The main thing is that either we have to keep the barn itself above freezing, or we have to take the components that can freeze and make sure we insulate them in a manner that they don't. And a lot of barns that I see, specifically in Canada, let's take an auto feeder barn, for example, they're going to build their feeding stations in the barn proper with no insulation or anything around it. And then that means now we have to keep that barn above freezing. What we do a lot in Wisconsin is we'll build what we call warm rooms, where all the components that can freeze, water lines and such, are put in the warm room, and just the nipples stick out for the auto feeder. And that way we can have our barn well below freezing and not have to worry about frozen components.
Yeah, cool, thanks.
Good question.
So we have another question here from Sweden, Martin Greif. He asked about how can you reduce the moisture in the air by positive pressure tubes. building a calf barn for 0 to 4 weeks old in a nursery, will there be an upside of preheating the ventilation air for those young calves, especially in a wet climate weather?
Yeah, so that you've probably asked the hardest question of all of the questions that we're probably going to get today, is that the idea of using our fresh outside air, which we saw from that research, showed that we have to go outside to get that low bacteria, low contamination air. Then the problem is it's going to come with some bad things. Sometimes it comes with extra heat, sometimes it comes with a lot of cold, but the worst is it comes with humidity. And so how do you deal with that humidity? That's by far the hardest part of ventilation, is that we can't, unless we're willing to pre-treat the air when it comes in, we're stuck with dealing with it, what it brings in the way it is. And you get those cold days in this fall and the spring where it's right around freezing or a little below freezing and it's damp and humid. Those days are colder to me than the -10 or -15 Celsius days where it's dry. And so really the only way that you're going to be able to deal with that moisture, and again, if it's not drafty, is either increase your ventilation rates. It's not going to reduce the moisture in the barn, your humidity, because we're ventilating with high humidity outside air. But if you increase your ventilation rates in a manner that's not drafty, we still get more fresh, humid air. I mean, it's not the most satisfying answer, but that's one option. The other option is you can try to preheat the air and take some of that humidity down. And that's a good solution, but my only concern is, again, if we go to heating the air in an attempt to reduce the humidity, inherently the human component is going to say, I'm tired of spending this much money on burning LP, I'm going to turn my ventilation rates down. And that, to me, if you have lower humidity air with a lower ventilation rate, I think that that's worse than higher humidity air with a higher ventilation rate, assuming it's not drafty, to keep that air fresh in the barn. Humidity is the hardest thing that there is to deal with. It just is.
And on the other side, I mean, there are also baby calves in like outdoor hutches. So I was trained on dairy farms in Germany, northwestern Germany, only like 200, 300 kilometers from the Northern Sea, super wet. Like the climate is wet. And calves in the hutches were still fine. We had them in there from day 1 to 14 days. Best calves. Like you just have to deal with the fact that you have to add up the bedding. It's not put in bedding, put in the calf and take it out after 14 days. Even in this relatively short time frame, you maybe have to add new dry bedding to absorb this extra moisture that you're dealing with, and you're doing good. Yeah, okay. One more. Yeah, did this. Okay, well, I guess then we come to the end of this webinar, and we did it for 50 minutes and we kept our audience, so that's great. Thanks, Ryan, for joining me today on this webinar. And I'm looking forward to see all of you in March again. Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.